Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Well, last Tuesday, a packed rotunda in the state capitol was the scene of a gun rights rally that, well, got a little controversial. We're going to deal with that subject matter, plus the state budget. Will it pass on time? That and more for a legislative update with Capitol reporters when we return.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, we're in this particular environment in Harrisburg these days where there's legislation that would establish more gun control in the state of Pennsylvania, always a controversial subject. This past week there was a rally against more gun control. It got a bit controversial. Joining me to chat about this, as often is the case, is John Micek, who's the Capitol reporter for the Allentown Morning Call, and Ben Simmoneau, who's an investigative reporter for WGAL-TV. John, let me start with you. You've covered, I won't get into how many rallies. What got controversial about this particular rally?
This is very heated. We're coming off the Virginia Tech shootings, of course, last week. So gun control is front and center in the debate right now. Hundreds of gun activists in the Capitol Rotunda this past Monday morning. Two guys in the back holding a banner saying that that Representative Angel Cruz, a Democrat from Philadelphia, who's pushing a gun registration bill, should be, quote, hung from the tree of liberty for acts of treason against the Constitution. Legislative Black Caucus later in the day went nuts over it, saying this was a threat. They wanted the state police to investigate. Understandably sensitive because of the very bad history of lynching that we have in this country, and it just sort of went from there.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, John pretty much sums it up. That was it. I think it was escalated by the fact that it did come about just a week and a day after the Virginia Tech shootings this week. Immediately, there was almost immediate reaction. It went to the House floor, actually. Republicans were kind of saying, hey, this was scheduled before the Virginia Tech shootings, but we do think that sign in particular crossed the line.
And you talk about stepping on the message. These guys are trying to pursue what they see as an honest agenda, and you had these two guys, these two or three people come in with this banner. I mean, to their credit, Representative Daryl Metcalf from Butler County and a couple of guys actually got up on the House floor and disavowed and put a country mile between themselves and
the folks holding the banner. For our viewers, make sure we understand this. So then the folks who were running the sort of the pro-gun rally, if I can use that expression, took to the House floor and repudiated.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they said nobody wants this, nobody condone this. We all kind of agree in general that crossed the line, and that was not what we were hoping to do this morning.
All right, John, look, you've covered a ton of these debates over gun control, and as you know, this is one of the toughest states to get gun control legislation through the legislature. Governor has won one gun a month. The Representative Cruz's measures that he would propose are a little different in the sense that they would involve every single gun owner, and I think that's what gets controversial because it would require licensing and... Go ahead.
And we talk about Social Security being the third rail of politics. In Pennsylvania, no, it's Remingtons and Smith & Wessons that are the third rail of Pennsylvania politics. There's a whole... particularly given the situation in Philadelphia right now, which has had a staggering 125 murders through the first 4 months of the year, this is something that a lot of people are talking about. But the weird thing about this is there was a lot of heat, there's a lot of light surrounding Representative Cruz's legislation, which would, one, require every gun owner to pay a $10 tax every year on every weapon they own, and every time they buy a new weapon, submit to photographing and fingerprinting so they can create a statewide database.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me,
the caveat is that it hasn't a prayer.
That's what
even
I was
Representative
say.
Cruz says it's not going anywhere.
Have you talked to, Ben, most of the folks you cover in WGL's, would be more conservative, would be more Republicans and Democrats, just because of the... Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is that, as John said, even Representative Cruz realizes that it has a very, very, very slim chance of passing. I think what he's looking to do is at least get the measure out there, get some kind of conversation started, because when you think about it, for folks who might live in the T, central or northern Pennsylvania or western Pennsylvania, $10 for every gun they own every year could add up to a lot of money.
But there's also this notion about... we talk about a national ID and how controversial that is. particularly relative to the immigration dispute we're having.
What's the big brother? It's the big brother image of his government, his state government in this case, becoming too encroaching upon individuals' rights.
And gun owners in particular tend to be strict constructionists when it comes to this kind of thing. They view the Second Amendment as sacrosanct, saying, I can own a gun, bar none, no interference from anything. And you heard a lot of that at the rally on Monday about government interference, that this was Big Brother trying to worm their way in their lives, and they were drawing this line in the sand.
Yeah, I noticed that, in a lot of the discussions after that horrendous tragedy down at Virginia Tech, where there was these discussions particularly among gun rights folks who were saying that if somebody had had a weapon there, they might have been able to end that situation without all of the loss of lives. So, I mean, that's sort of the typical defense, I think, that gun rights advocates use. That if you have a weapon and it's available, you might be able to prevent that. I heard a lot of that conversation. Did you hear any of that?
I heard some of that. I'm not sure how much credence do they give that kind of argument. Right. I mean, okay, so one guy's armed, the other guy's armed, and what, you have a firefight inside a university classroom?
Well,
sure, but the weird thing about this is that we're going to have this debate, and we're going to have this discussion about whether or not more gun control is needed or less gun control is needed. And at the end of it, exactly nothing is going to change.
You agree with that?
In Pennsylvania, probably. I think probably as much as the governor is pushing. The governor, for instance, is pushing 1 gun a month. You have to remember, Virginia, for instance, has 1 gun a month.
Yep.
So,
all right, when we come back, there was a little dispute this week over a couple of cabinet officers' confirmation. After, we're in Governor Rendell's 2nd term now. These cabinet officers have to be reconfirmed. We'll find out if the governor blinked or not, where 2 are concerned. We'll deal with that when we return.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to our Journalist Roundtable with John Micek from the Allentown Morning Call and Ben Simmoneau from WGAL-TV. John, let me start with you. Typically, governor makes recommendations, does appointments to his cabinet post. They go to the Senate for confirmation. These are routine.
That's right.
Something was not routine last week. What was it?
Well, up for reappointment this year, two of Governor Rendell's cabinet secretaries, Kathleen McGinty, who runs the Department of Environmental Protection, and Michael DeBerardinis, who's Secretary of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Comes to light last week that over the preceding 4 years, Secretaries McGinty and DeBerardinis had steered about $4 million in aggregate in grant money to organizations in which their spouses are involved.
Okay.
Senate found out about this, went nuts, and wanted to hold up the confirmation while they got an opinion from the State Ethics Commission as to whether or not this was proper. Governor Rendell found out about it. Governor Rendell was asked about it yesterday. Insists that spouses of both secretaries did not benefit financially and both have a tertiary role in this grant money being awarded. Drew a line in the sand and said, basically dared the Senate not to reappoint, and said if they didn't, that he would in effect make a recess appointment and have them act as acting secretaries forever for the life of the administration.
Now Ben, I know because you were on this story along with John earlier in the week that there's actually less money that they allegedly steer. Go ahead, make that point.
That's what the administration says. These 2 organizations in the past 4 years received less money than they did under the Ridge-Schweiker administration. So they're saying this is much ado about nothing. This is purely politics and Senate Republicans wanting to make the governor's Democratic administration look bad. So that's and I think Secretary McGinty points out that her husband only made $3,600. He was a consultant or something for the organization, only made about $3,600. So the administration says it's just Republicans playing politics. The Republicans say, why don't we just at least ask the Ethics Commission to take a look at this and see what happens, which is what ended up happening.
I mean, now the governor has said, I'll withdraw them and make a new appointment. He can reappoint them.
He did what the Senate Republicans, in the end, at first he drew the line in the sand, as John said, but in the end he did what the Senate Republicans wanted him to do.
And that's a pretty significant tactical defeat, and maybe a foreshadowing of what kind of budget season that we're in for here. Until now, we've never really known what the new Republican leadership in the Senate was going to be like. This was really their...
You think they're going to be tougher than the old leadership?
I think they are. I mean, the old leadership, Senators Jubilee and Brightbill, were decried by conservatives for being far too accommodating to the administration.
Exactly.
You hear conservatives saying that they want the new group to be much more obstructionist. The early rhetoric we've heard out of Senators Scarnati and Pileggi seems to be that they're going to be fair, but they're going to be tough.
Yeah.
We see in this first public act that typically these things roll right through.
They sure do.
They put up the roadblock. This could be an indication of what we're in for.
So would you agree that this looks like a tougher time for Governor, in the interviews that you've done with these folks, tougher time for the budget? I mean, this all comes down to the governor's initiatives and the budget that the Republicans seem to be taking this tougher line.
Well, keep in mind also the dynamics on the other side of the Capitol and the House. The Senate is kind of the last vestige that Republicans really control outright, because, I mean, you have this kind of split arrangement in the House where essentially Democrats are in charge of committee chairs and they're running things in the House. So if Republicans are going to make a stand, the only place they can do it is in the Senate.
I mean, what's amazing, though, is the whiplash here, and we can only hope that the governor was wearing his seatbelt when it happened. But, I mean, early in the afternoon, hardline, not going to happen. I dare him. And then 2 hours later, complete 180, he's going to go along with it.
Is it possible, Ben, that what the governor was thinking was, look, I can reappoint him anyway, and the governor did say, let the Ethics Commission go review it anyway, and let's see how it comes out in the wash. Right. I mean, do you think maybe he just didn't want to quarrel at this point with the budget so close?
That's possible. I mean, maybe he is building ammunition for when because I mean, all indications I'm sure that John is hearing and that I'm hearing is it's going to be a very difficult budget negotiation process. We could be months or weeks or months after the deadline.
Yeah, they've been told, I understand,
not to make any plans.
Yeah, don't go on vacation.
So no one is leaving Harrisburg in July. Yeah. All right, great update as always.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We're doing our journalist roundtable with John Micek from the Allentown Call and Ben Simmoneau from WGAL-TV. We've been chatting about a bunch of subjects that the Pennsylvania State Legislature is dealing with. Gentlemen, let me go to this. We got 2 months now before the June 30 budget deadline, about 2 months. The governor's 5 big initiatives don't seem to be moving. The budget, John Micek, doesn't seem to be moving very quickly. You're up on the Hill every day. What's going on?
There is a staggering lack of momentum right now. It's just the absence of activity is marked. The House Democrats now have control of the House for the first time in 12 years. They're dictating the agenda and are coming off a whole lot like the dog who caught the mailman. It's amazing that they've not been able to get their arms around this. The budget is still being drafted. They now say they want to introduce it sometime around the week of May 7th, which will give them 60 days to do it. But good Lord,
Ben, there's some pretty big. Go ahead. Different chambers. Take it.
Yeah, the governor's health care plan so far has had very little movement forward, and a lot of Republicans say that, in fact, someone said last week it would require an act of Congress to get that plan to go forward. So there's not a lot of taste for that in the legislature, it seems, right now. There's been very little progress, if any, on the governor's initiative to lease the turnpike, even though Republicans actually like that proposal. There's been there's been real no progress on his oil company profits tax, so the transportation issues really are lagging down, and like John says, there's been very little progress on actually coming to some kind of even a budget draft.
And let me ask you a question. Do they agree, either one of you can, we hear Bill DeWeese, the majority leader in the House, has said that there's a $2 billion shortfall in this year's budget. He said it all along.
That's right.
In addition to wanting to do the governor's 5 big initiatives, of which Ben just spoke about a couple, what about the $2 billion shortfall?
Well, they're talking about a 1% hike in the sales tax.
To pay for some of that.
To help close the hole, and also to help pay a little bit for more property tax hikes for homeowners. But the Democrats, nobody in the Democratic caucus appears to want to put their name on a tax hike, and the Republicans are constitutionally opposed, just as a matter of philosophy, to voting for a tax hike.
And Ben, many of the people who were elected, and I know you covered a lot of those campaigns in central Pennsylvania where a lot of the new members were elected, didn't they run on an anti-tax hike?
Yeah, smaller government. They wanted smaller government.
And no pay hike.
And here the governor comes out in February with his budget address and says, I want this new tax, this new tax, this new tax, and this new tax to fill this looming budget hole.
Right.
So they have, but again, the interesting thing, like John said, is they know they have a gap. There's going to be a $2 billion by any means gap in this budget, yet they don't even have a draft yet to tell them exactly how big that is or how they're going to fill it.
So let me get this straight. We could have a $2 billion deficit, which would require either programmatic cuts, that's a lot of programmatic cuts, popular programs, a tax to deal with that, plus the governor's initiatives all have taxes connected to them in some way, correct?
Right. Exactly.
So the stage is set. Is anybody taking a vacation? Are you guys planning to go away in like July 5th or 10th or 30th?
I started kissing off my Julys back in 2003.
No vacation plan, Ben.
No, certainly not in July. They've been warned. Staffers have been definitely warned to stick around. Don't plan for your vacations this summer in July or even possibly August. It could be a while.
Yeah. So the way it looks in summary is, it could be the June 30 deadline. It's problematic. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Problematic that they'll meet the deadline. The governor's big initiatives, some question about whether any of them would pass by the June 30 deadline.
I mean, what we may see is a budget by June 30th. There seems to be unanimity of agreement that most people want to try to finish on time.
But that would be a pared down, narrower without all these other...
I can't imagine a universe where the governor would get all or even some of what he's talking about in terms of June 30th.
I asked the governor here a couple of weeks ago when he was on, I said, no, look, you have these 5 big initiatives, right? I know you're going to tell me you want them by June 30, but isn't it really what I called a second-term agenda, meaning that they'll take place in pieces over the next 4 years.
But keep in mind, with the turnpike and the oil company profits, the transportation initiatives, PennDOT is saying we can't wait. We have no choice but we have 6,000 bridges that are deficient. We have 9,000 miles of highways that need repair.
It's a 4-year agenda in 2 years. And the turnpike and transit piece that Ben is talking about, that could be we could see something that would come together, say, in the early fall.
But let me ask you this: of those initiatives, and you know we've talked about them on this program many times: healthcare, energy, lease the turnpike.
Legislative reform.
And the legislative reform stuff. The paying for the roads and bridges and the transit, right? It's been estimated at $1.7 billion per year. Am I about right?
That's right.
To do all
That's for the bare bones.
Bare bones.
Saying,
Is that, do you think, the big priority of all of the governor's new initiatives? Yes or no? You've been covering this. What do you think?
I think the interesting thing is the turnpike lease seems to have, and I don't know if you'd agree, John, seems to have the most favorable opinion. The Republicans seem to have the most favorable appetite for that because that is getting government out of something where government's been. So that seems to be the most...
I mean, there seem to be philosophical inclinations that way, but of course the big questions of how you do it, who does it, who gets hurt.
Oh, there are a lot of big
the money
questions.
That comes back in. Yeah, exactly.
But you would admit that's the big nut, because that's something they have to do. They can't prolong...
Especially now with word that gas could reach $4 a gallon by the end of the summer.
All right, we got to get out of here. We'll be back for the final segment of Pennsylvania Newsmakers after we, I guess, pay some bills. See you in a minute.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Builders Association, building today for a better tomorrow. And by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
All right, the final segment of Pennsylvania Newsmakers with John Micek from the Allentown Call and Ben Simmoneau from WGAL. All right, in addition to all of the other aspects of government that we've been talking about and sort of the politics of the budget, we've got a couple of interesting situations that have occurred. One is what has been called Bonusgate. First of all, before we get into what's going on, Ben, what is Bonusgate? Explain the facts of Bonusgate.
It started with, I believe, a Patriot News article back in late December, I think was the timeline. They got a letter. The House Democratic Caucus handed out a bunch of bonuses and ordered the staffers not to talk about them. Well, that led only reporters, of course, to ask questions.
Yeah, right.
Led to the revelation that over the past 2 years, the 4 caucuses have handed out something close to $4 million in bonuses to staffers. And the House Democratic Caucus was the bulk of that, coming in over about $2 million, I think. The question was this taxpayer dollars, was it state money that was really paid as a bonus but given for the guys for doing extra work on campaigns? That was the question that was being raised.
And now, John, as a result of that, this has led to
a grand jury in Pittsburgh that is trying to answer that very question, convened by State Attorney General Tom Corbett. You know, there's not a lot of word coming out of there, but I imagine it can't be very comfortable for the people who are being called in for questioning.
We've known that Corbett was investigating, in a kind of the broad sense of the term, for a couple of months, pretty much right after the word came out, all the newspaper articles and the TV stories. What we didn't know is that it went to a grand jury until 2 weeks ago, and that's kind of a step forward. That's a ratcheting up of the investigation.
But this is another one of those issues that involves what we've talked about on this program for a long time, and I know both of you have written lots of stories about this, and that has to do with openness and transparency, where they've been given these bonuses, and they've been given them for some time, I guess, and no one was aware of them. Is that correct? It
didn't show up on the payroll records. They were kept separate. And, I mean, you can get the House payroll and see what everyone is making, but you've only gotten their base salaries.
But how can that not show up?
Because, well, the one big thing is the legislature, a lot of folks don't know, has exempted itself from the right to know law. So the only information we get is from their good graces, essentially. So they don't have to show you anything. So what they do show you.
But there was there was a lot of press about this. I mean, a lot of folks in your profession.
The bonuses were huge. They're 12 to 29% of base salary. No one gets a 12% raise. If you're lucky, you get a 3% inflationary adjustment to your wages.
There were some folks that walked away.
No written or no published criteria, or were there?
The House Republicans said they did have a set process. I think all the bonuses were either 5% or 10%. So they had a set process. The ones in the House Democratic Caucus and in the Senate Republican Caucus seemed to be kind of more haphazard. Right. There were instances of folks walking away with $41,000 over 2 years, which I think to the average Pennsylvanian who probably makes less than that seems like a lot of money.
We only have about 30 seconds left, but the one point I would make, this all came about because the majority leader made an offhand comment thanking people for the work they did on the campaign at the time these bonuses were announced. Is that right? Is that why the nexus between the political activity, the potential nexus? No? Yes?
I don't.
The only thing I know is that there was a much greater increase in bonuses in the election year compared to the year before.
All right, thanks. Great update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well.